Welcome to this podcast. I'm delighted to have Nageshwar and Vaidyanathan with me, Nag in short. Uh, just a quick introduction. Nag currently serves as the CTO at Duck Creek Technologies. We'll find out more about that soon. Prior to this, Nag was the CTO at One Main Financial, which is into providing consumer loans to individuals who have limited access to traditional lenders such as banks and credit cards. Before that, Nag was working in Copenhagen in Denmark, where he was the EVP and CIO for the personal banking division at Danske Bank, which is where I met and got to know Nag when he was in Copenhagen, and we managed to stay in touch after his return to the US. Um, Through these jobs or positions, Nag has worked with multiple teams spanning geographies. Some of them include India, US, Denmark, of course, and Lithuania, to name a few. Uh, Apart from this, Nag, as I know, is also heavily involved in various initiatives related to giving back to society. He currently serves as the president of Pratham USA, which is involved with providing underprivileged kids in India access to education and vocational skills. He's also the member of the Indo-American Community Services, providing advice and counseling on how to get students, professionals, improve their chances of starting on a successful career. Nag also mentors people within and outside his company. And currently he also mentors students in CBS, where he was involved when he was in Denmark. Although I have not worked with Nag, what really shines through is his simplicity and humility, which I'm sure translates into his leadership as well. So that's a brief introduction, Nag. I hope I covered the main points and hope did some justice to who you are. So first question, how are you doing?
Been doing well, I would say. It is hard for me being an introvert, and working from home is actually quite hard because someone really has to give me a kick on my backside to talk to people. And now working from home, right, it just makes it doubly hard. I really benefit from talking to people one by one, understanding how they're doing, what's in their way. And now you have to set up meetings for everything. And it's kind of difficult that way. I would say that's one thing. The second thing is, I think the boundary between work and home has got so blurred now. Absolutely. Because of working from home, right? So that's another thing I'm trying to learn. And the last thing I would say is I had not been at home for a long time. And now coming back from home, it's hard because we have our 4 parents who stay with us also. Our house is not that large, right? So trying to find the space to have quiet meetings, have some hard conversations is a little harder than it used to be. So I would say those are some of the key things that I'm adapting to. And I'm sure people from across different domains, different locations are all figuring it out. So that's where I am.
Great. It's interesting you started with saying that you're an introvert and that's been a challenge. I'd want to come back to that. But I think talking about working from home, it's a challenge the whole world is facing. And I think we're all adapting to that in different ways, in different geographies, right? So the way I thought I'd structure this talk is, let's go back all the way to the start, to your kind of growing up days, and then let's work our way back to the present, so to speak. Okay. So you're from India originally, right, Nag? So you grew up in India, did your schooling there, early education there. I want to know a little bit about your childhood and growing up days, particularly, was anything particular from your childhood or any experiences which you think has had an impact on who you are today and the way you are, the way you lead today?
Yeah, so I grew up in Bangalore, India, and Bangalore is not what it is today. It used to be called the air-conditioned city, the garden city of India.
Right.
There was a lot of serenity and quietness there. And I feel now it's become a concrete jungle, right? But where I grew up, we were a very, very, I would say, lower middle class family. My mom used to teach the veena, which is a instrument that is, I would say, quite well known in South India. And my dad used to be a typist, if you call it, in Hindustan Aeronautics Limited. So grew up really humble. I have one brother, and we lived in a one-room small house, right? not even a bathroom, which was shared with the landlord, if I call it. So that upbringing, my dad, for whatever reason, wanted me to study in an English medium school. So it was expensive for him, but he still got me into it. And I was very lucky because my neighbors believed in me and my brother, and they would give me their textbooks after they studied. It was such a lucky thing for me because they were 1 year senior to me.
Mhm.
And my brother's 3 years junior. And between me and my brother, there was another neighbor who kind of was between us. So we could actually circulate textbooks, and my dad would get old printer paper for notes, right? So kind of grew up that way, humble, but it taught me that, hey, I need to do something, right? So from when I was young, there was this thing in me, this energy or this light in me, which said, I need to give back. I need to help my parents. I need to give back to the community because I was lucky, right?
Right.
So that really got into me. And schooling was good because the only thing I knew was to study. I was not good at sports. I was not good at anything, right? But I was good memorizing, if I call it that way, in India. So did well in school, and people leaned on me for homework. So
Mhm.
that told me, hey, I actually have something I can give others. So grew up that way, but there was this dream in me as I started becoming bigger in India, saying that I want to do something outside of India. And I don't know why, but I used to keep telling my mom, I want to go to Germany. There was
Okay.
no real reason, nothing like that. But it ended up that way for me too, because my first job was in Amco Batteries, which was an India uh, Japanese company, Amco Yuasa. And because of how I grew up, the executive leader there asked, so they put me in R&D after my engineering, right? So uh, the guy came and asked me, what is R&D? I said, receive and duplicate. And I said, read and draw. So they said, oh, you actually think of stuff differently. We're going to put you in marketing.
Okay.
And me and marketing are like opposites, right? So the function I had was to do cash collection from government companies in India. And I think it's hard even today, but in those days, it was so hard to get money that the company owed,
Right.
like company was owed, right? So I would sit patiently. It taught me patience. It taught me how to deal with different government entities, the defense entities, the railways, right? Because that's where we used to sell batteries. It gave me a lot of learning in terms of how I could work with people who don't want to talk to you, how to work with people who think they are big,
Mhm.
how to work with people who just had to be between other people, and how to work with people who just open doors to get to meet someone else, right?
Right.
What small conversations you should have, what serious conversations you should have, how do you influence, uh, developing that art of patience, as well as I would say, developing that skill of smile. It really has helped me to smile, right? And then I started thinking about smile and I said, smile really is showing meaning in life every day. That is what SMILE stands for me.
Okay.
And I said, okay, I'm going to take that forward. So these are some of the steps I would say that got me to my first job abroad, which was with British Aerospace in England.
Okay.
And it was a very, very different experience for me. Um, when I used to walk on the road, they would think I belong to the post office there.
Mhm.
So, because I think typically the Indian guys in the US worked for either in a shop or in the post office. Then I would say, no, I work for a software company, British Aerospace. They say, oh, really? Right? Um, so started there. It gave me a lot of courage and confidence in me, I would say, coming from outside of India, being within that close-knit four-member family to really experiencing something externally. And then the journey just went on. So the upbringing in India really helped me kind of build this strong foundation,
Mhm.
which taught me how to deal with different kinds of people, taught me patience, taught me that things are not going to work the way you want. There's going to be a lot of complexity, which in honestly, we just create it to make. I always say that a lot of busy people who add no value, right? There's a lot of those guys who come in your way. And how do you kind of filter through them to do what you need to do? So that's really how I think and I reflect back.
Fantastic. I mean, it's fascinating. I mean, as you mentioned, the humble beginnings to kind of the journey through your first job and moving to UK, how it kind of opened up your mind space, so to speak, right? Um, you also mentioned about what really you learned was how to deal with different kinds of people. I guess that's one of the core things as a leader you do, right? You basically deal with different types of people. So moving, if you look at where you started and moving to the UK and kind of ending up in the West, so to speak, where you know it's a different working environment, different set of values, principles that are considered better compared to India or the East. Um, what are the kind of uh, skills or values that you carried from your upbringing that you think still hold you in good stead in your current uh, workspace?
Yeah, so one of the things that has helped me in my journey, and I always believe I'm under construction, right? That is something I truly, truly believe in, because every day you learn something new. You're always presented with a new surprise, and you're always going to be confronted with something you never kind of assumed or thought would happen. So that is just part of my fabric. So what I have done that has kind of helped me kind of adapt. I can't say I fully adapted, but learning how to adapt has been through mentorship. Uh, there is some weirdness in me that I don't hesitate, even though I'm an introvert, I don't hesitate to ask people for help, ask people for advice, or ask people, hey, can you just be my mentor? And the funny part I've learned, right, irrespective of the different cultures you work in, locations you work in, when you ask people for help or you make somebody else feel a little bigger than you, they always want to do something for you.
Yeah.
So I found that weakness, if I call it in others, right? If I call it a weakness, because they really want to cover and say, I can do something for you. So that has been a real kind of add-on for me as I've been under construction. So coming from India, like I said, all of these different nuances I learned about people and how to interact with different kinds of people. Then coming to the UK, which is in between, if I say between India and the West, where there was hierarchy, the way people talked, right? The way people kind of did what they did. And British Aerospace being a government kind of setup, it was a little rigid, if I call it. So I learned some of those processes, policies, rules, which was a good enforcer for me in terms of how I thought about getting stuff done. It was no more, Ranjit, can you do this, right? I have to document, I am asking Ranjit to do this. So that was a learning that came in. And then when I landed in the US in 1995, few things happened, right? One is I had to use those learnings that I had of people in India, knowing fully that I'm going to be dealing with an entirely different set of people. The goodness of US, I feel, is it's a melting pot of all kinds of cultures, all kinds of diversity, people coming who are well learned versus things who are just coming to find jobs versus people who are just trying to survive. So you have that whole mix. And I landed in the Chicago suburbs in 95. I had no idea what snow meant. It was a super heavy, snowy winter there. And I did not know how to drive a car. We came with $100, right? I was newly married. Wife did not know me. I did not know her. It was an
Oh.
arranged marriage. So it was a fantastic start for us, in a sense, a reboot, right? So I landed up in a Motel 6, which is like a small kind of motel in the US. And we had no money, right? So right from there, I had to understand how I could use the values and learnings from India to kind of survive and thrive. And I would say India gives you a lot of that, because you really have to adjust, adapt, make stuff with where you did not have things, right? So use those nuances. Even though I was so quiet, my parents and my wife's parents were worried because we would not even talk to each other because I was such an introvert and I did not talk to girls. It was a weird thing at that time. So learning that and kind of walking to work, I actually had people who would take me in their car and drop me to work. I don't know why they felt sorry for me, but they would do that. But that created connections for me. And many of those connections still exist for me, right? And I have done whatever I can to give back to them. in terms of their kids, how they are doing, right? When their parents had to come to the US, helping them with the green card process, things like that, because I had gone through this journey. So I would say a lot of the learnings from India really helped. I had to build on top of it.
Mhm.
One thing my mentor, right, a lady who mentored me said, never change who you are, right? Because that is who you are. Don't change who you are, but change how others see you. That was a great
Oh.
advice I got from one of my mentors.
Mhm.
So be authentic, be yourself. However, don't get so bogged down by who you are that people cannot see the other side of you, right? So how do you kind of develop those skills? So she gave me all kinds of small tips. For example, I don't drink, I don't eat meat, I don't interact with people. She said, Nag, why do you allow people to show their backs to you? That hurt me when she said that. And I realized, yeah, I was doing that. So dumb of me, right?
Can
So
you
she would
explain
say,
what do you mean show their backs to you?
so I would stand at the back of the room
Mhm.
and everybody would stand in front of me. So their backs were against me, right?
Mhm.
And like an idiot, I would just stand at the back. And she said, why do you do that? So she would say, just hold a glass of water now. People who are drunk, they think it's vodka. Why do you worry? And she said, I know you're worried about being in the front of stuff. Just sit in the middle of a table. Every interaction passes your eye, right? So these small tips were provided to me. The second part was cultures are different. So in the US, the way people kind of showcase who they are is very different from how people showcase who they are in the UK and India, which I was exposed to. So I started really looking at people, understanding how people said what they said versus what they did. And I said, okay, there is always three coats of cream on whatever is the cake underneath, right? And I said, okay, that's how it works. So now how do I get behind that cream and really get to know people? So some of the learnings in India helped me there too, the curiosity aspects, right? So I would start asking people, uh, can you explain why you do this? Can you tell me why this is done this way? Can you tell me what makes you this? So like a lot of can you tell me? And when you use can you tell me, it is more like I am learning and somebody's telling me what it is. So choice of words became critical, right? And what happened because of that is I started creating bridges without me realizing to close that gap that I had in terms of who I was versus where the others were. And the funny part was what I learned as a result was there were a lot of people waiting for people like me to ask those questions. And I just became kind of a natural leader, if you call it,
Mm.
for those people, right? So that's a tidbit of what I did, taking forward what I learned in India and kind of learning how to live in the US.
You
Um,
mentioned about about you kind of built bridges between people. Like, can you give an example of how you went about doing that?
so there were, yeah, so what I mean by that is like there were people like me who really did not know why certain people did what they did, right? In terms of how they interacted, the way they spoke, the way they came across, but they were not confident, or I would say had the guts to ask these questions.
Mm.
But by me adapting this curious mindset and kind of saying that I want to learn why you do certain things, and like, can you tell me? Can you help me? Right? Can you explain? All of these phrases help close that gap and create the bridges between them and people like me.
Mm.
The other part that was interesting was people who were growing up saw me as someone they can actually emulate because I don't have any fancy ways of looking at stuff or coming across sophisticated, right? So it gave people a lot of courage saying, if Nal can do this, I can do this.
Mm.
He looks like an idiot. He doesn't dress up well. He can make big things happen. I can do that too, right? So it gave people confidence. And then the third part, which was very interesting, is because of me growing up in India, going to the UK and coming to the US, there was this global mindset that got framed within me where I did not really, I would say I was not constrained by where people were.
Mhm.
Every voice mattered, and it was irrespective of where that person was in their career, in where they lived, who they worked with. that kind of smoothened things out for me personally. And that smoothening actually helped people who worked with me and also the people who did not know how to work in that kind of a setup, right? So that is what I meant by bridges.
Great. One of the things I just want to follow up on, you mentioned, so you ended up in the US with your wife, who you were newly married to. You said you hardly spoke to her. So kind of starting from there with kind of almost nothing, uh, being almost strangers to each other, ending up in this strange country, to where you're now. Do you think that kind of helped cement your relationship, make it stronger?
Yeah, a few things for me, right? Again, because of how I grew up and who I am, it did take me some time to talk to her. I started with hello, actually. I did not even call her by name for some time. The good part is, even though it was an arranged marriage, she had a lot that I did not have.
Mhm.
She was a lot more courageous. She had the, I'm going to do it. I'm going to really like driving as an example. I'm going to learn how to drive first, right? Then she taught me how to drive. I'm going to learn how to kind of open a bank account. I'm going to get this, all these starting points. She actually took the initiative. I am lazy by nature too. So that was a good thing because she took that initiative and she got me to follow. And that was, I would say, the initial starts for how we started getting to know each other, right? And then she knew that I had the opposite of her, which meant I had ideas, but I was lazy to do stuff, right? And the second part was I had a lot more things where I would weigh options and do things in a very different way, which complemented her skills, right? So that itself started creating that mesh where we both could work well together. The way I interacted with people was very different from how she interacted with people.
Mhm.
And that way we got a bigger set of connections to work with. So those were some of the things that helped kind of build our relationship. And the last part I would say really that was good is she also likes giving back. I also like giving back. So together we have that common kind of thing saying, hey, there are so many people who made us who we are today. We need to do whatever we can to help people who may not have that, right?
Right.
So that has actually helped accelerate a lot of the things that we wanted to do together. And the last part, I would say she has this very good idea, which I really am not good at, which is we live only once, enjoy life, right? And I would say, no, we grew up humble. We should not spend all this money. It's okay, right? She'd say, no, we deserve it. We are earning money. The kids need it. We have to take care of our parents. We are going to travel the world. We are going to see what we need to do, right? So she has that in her. So I would say all of that really has helped close some of the gaps that I have as a human.
Fantastic. And the reason I asked is that I guess, I mean, if if you want to bring your best self to work every day, right? Especially when the chips are down, when you have to kind of really pull people to a certain direction. I feel it really helps if you have a certain amount of
Mhm,
stability in your
mhm,
personal life as well.
mhm,
So and I think it's certainly the case with you that it really kind of helps you
mhm. Yep.
do much
I
more
think
in your
that
professional life.
I would say that plus as soon as we could afford it, we started bringing our parents to the US, right? They would initially come for a few months of the year until we could get the green card processed and all that, right? So I would say that also helped quite a lot
Mhm.
because we both are ambitious. We both wanted to study more. At the same time, we wanted to have a family, right?
Right.
So with so many different variables happening at the same time, we needed somebody to kind of keep the foundation going
Mhm.
strong, right? So both sets of parents have been super, super helpful for us. Even now, right, as I'm talking to you, my mother-in-law and father-in-law are doing stuff in the kitchen, right? So that's kind of how lucky we are, I would
Yeah.
say, in terms of them helping us.
Fantastic. And it's great that the US allows for family to kind of join and live
Right,
that way as well.
right.
Final question, talking about values from India. Now, one thing I was really curious to ask your opinion on. One of the proud things for people coming from India, as we say, the CEOs of arguably the top three tech companies in the world are from India, right? Um, some say it could be just mere coincidence. Um, if not, what in your opinion are the kind of the traits they have coming from India, many of them from humble middle class backgrounds, that has led them open these doors, which was kind of not thought of maybe 5, 10 years ago. Is there any common characteristic that growing up in that environment, moving to the West, helps them?
I think some of the things that I said, I would allude to those, right? Dealing with different types of people, cultivating the patience, understanding the language behind what people say, collaborating with people who might be from different backgrounds, levels, studying. That's a key thing in India. Everybody had to become an engineer or a doctor or whatever, right? So we had educational credentials, and the bigger the institute you went to, you seem to be someone who knew more, whether that's right or wrong. I would say that, and I would say the curiosity, right, with adapting. That's really helped a lot of people. They are not changing who they are. If you look at any of those large company CEOs, like you said, Ranjit, they are humble, but at the same time, they are still who they are, right?
Right.
Um, what they have done is they have brought people with them who kind of compensate for the gaps that they might have in terms of how they interact with their teams, in terms of how they talk to the external entities, the government, right? So they bring the right people with them because they know how to interact with these different kinds of people. So they don't bring stereotypes, right? They bring the people who can actually make these changes happen. And I would say the last part is because of the ability to adapt, right? They are able to kind of create organizations which are not traditional organizations. They think about structures that are very unconventional. They think of global setups. They think of cost. Indians really think of cost, right? It's a big ingredient of how we grew up, especially as a humble family. So I think all of these actually have created that sense. And I would say the last part which has helped, and I don't know if it's right or wrong, at least within the US, there is a lot of focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it has opened doors for people who don't look like most of the people to actually be able to contribute and give back. So that has also kind of created an opportunity for that, right? Um, I would say those are some of the things I think through as you ask the question. Yeah.
Fascinating. Um, I want to now switch to your career and the journey you've taken. Right. From what I've seen and heard so far, there are usually two parts to career. One is when people plan very specifically. I want to reach position X in X number of years, or so on, or then they just don't plan and things happen. Which route have you taken? Uh,
So in my case, like I told you, for whatever reason, when I was very little, I told my mom and dad I wanted to go to Germany, right? There was no real reason for that. It was just a funny, if I reflect back, a funny statement. Um, no, I would not say I planned fully for who I've become today. And like I said, I'm also under construction. So I really believe I can do a lot more in different ways, right? It doesn't have to be just vertical, right? Picking up different ideas, picking up different things, helping people. Just yesterday, I signed up to be a board advisor for another tech company, right? So I try to do these things because I want to give back as well as learn, right?
right,
They are
right.
doing something that interested me.
Mm,
For me, I would say if I call it what got me into this was I kind of was proud of being a really good developer. Okay, as a software developer, I thought I was good at it. Came to the US, worked for Allstate Insurance Company. I was a good coder, good designer, and I don't know why, but one of the managers there thought I could be a good manager, and I actually protested that, saying, "No, I really like what I'm doing. I like technology. I like to delve into it." She said, "No, Nag, you're actually good with people." And I honestly did not know that was showcased, right? So in a sense, I was, if you call it, asked to become a manager. And when I became a manager, it was very weird if I reflect back, but it has helped me. I thought of, so I had like a 5-member team that I had to lead first. I thought of each of these people as software. And I said, they have different inputs, different outputs, they interact differently. And I'm going to deal with each of these people differently. What that resulted in was very good leadership. without me knowing, right? Because each person felt they were treated the way they deserved to be treated, interacted the way they wanted to be interacted with. And when I got into that, if I reflect back, it is so funny because they thought I was a good leader and more people were added to me. Then I started creating software patterns. I kind of use the same way I kind of became a software developer designer. And I said, these are different software patterns. And I started creating ways of interaction by these patterns.
Mhm.
So that is how I got into leadership. Um, and then I have to be honest, as I got in and I got titled, I did get a little, what do you call, greedy, if you call it, right? I wanted to become a bigger leader, a
Yep.
bigger leader, a bigger leader. What I did do though during that journey is I always put together a career path and a career plan for me. I knew I had to make sacrifices. And to your earlier question, Ranjit, I knew I had to depend on my family while I made those sacrifices, and they sacrificed too, right? They sacrificed a lot for me. Um, but I always put an exit strategy. So I would think of the highways in the US, and you always had these exits, right? If you missed an exit, you had to go quite far to the next exit.
Right.
So I was, I always, even to date, I have that, right? If I'm doing A, B, C, and if I'm not going to get to C, what is my next path?
Mhm.
Not that everything happens, but at least I've thought through it.
Right.
And I continually revisit that. Okay, so that is one thing I do. The second thing I do, which helps me a lot, and maybe I'm overdoing it, is reflecting. I maintain a diary, and every single day, if to date, I write down what are the goods and bads of each day. Have I added value? Have I subtracted value? Right? And when I see there's a pattern where I've subtracted value, I feel okay, I'm not doing a good job. I need to do something different. And then the last part, like I said, is the mentorship aspect, right? I always seek multiple mentors. I don't keep one mentor. And I purposely do that because I know that is what the real world is. There are different types of people with different perspectives. And these mentors give me different perspectives for the same advice I seek, right?
Right.
So it helps me really think through and say, okay, yeah, people can think of it this way, that way, right? And me as a person, where do I fall? So those are some of the things. And the last part I would say for me outside of the three is I have created a phrase for myself or an acronym for myself, maybe because I grew up as an engineer. I call myself happy leader. Okay, so for me, that is important. That's my value system. So happy for me is H is being humble, A is being action oriented, P is being personable, P is being passionate, and Y is yourself. I really kind of believe in that. And when I work with any organization, I make sure that I'm able to kind of live to those values.
Mm.
And if I feel, and I have to use the word feel, then, and if I feel that that value is being compromised, I take a different action. Okay, so that is one. Leader for me is something I crafted after I got into leadership. L is listen, E is engage, A is acknowledge, D is develop actions, E is enable the team, and R is reward, recognize, reflect, right? So I've started using that for me in terms of how I lead teams.
Mm.
And there have been adjustments now with the pandemic though, because the leader, I cannot do it in my natural way in terms of how I listen, engage, and acknowledge. When I was in physical rooms, it was a little easier for me. Being in virtual rooms, it's a little harder for me. So I have to do a lot of seeking to understand.
Mm.
So, which has resulted sometimes in more meetings and emails, which I don't like, but that has been a vehicle for me that has enabled me to develop the right actions. Because if I don't do the listen, engage, and acknowledge well, then the actions I kind of say should be taken are
Right.
not going to be fully thought through. So that's kind of how I've gone through my leadership journey. And now it's more, like I said, looking more horizontally,
Mhm.
right? Like what else can I do? How can I help? I do have, if you call, I do want to start my own company. That's something I've been thinking.
Okay.
Yeah, and my wife says, take some, like let the kids finish their education, right? Because of the risks that might be involved. But that's a thing I do have a dream.
Right. So you also already answered one of the questions I had, which was around, every leader is unique, and they'll kind of the way they lead is unique as the personality. So happy leader, that defines your kind of leadership, so to speak.
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
Um, Another question was, so I mean, from your early leadership days, as when you were asked to be a manager and kind of you were added or given more responsibilities, to where you are now as EVP, CTO, CIO, which is almost the pinnacle in terms of career. Was it a gradual progress, or were there kind of any certain inflection points or breaks or something you did that kind of helped you move to the highest level? Because usually many people, they progress well, but sometimes they get stuck in so-called
Stuck.
middle management.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, how was it with your career?
I will not use the word lucky because I don't think that's the right word.
Mhm.
I would say I was encouraged by people who believed in me. And that really gave me motivation beyond what I knew I could do, right? So there I was, that's why I said lucky is
Sure.
not the right word, but people saw potential in me that I did not know I had. And that is why I say lucky, right? So sometimes you limit yourself by who you think you can be and who you think others might think you are. But in my case, to date, right, um, people have invested in me knowing there could be a good return, right?
Right.
And it has panned out both ways. It has panned out for me really well, and for the person who said, "Now can do this," right? Um, I would say that is one. The second thing that I learned that really helped me is you need to ask for what you want.
Mhm.
It seems weird, but it is actually true. Because what happens is the higher the leaders are in an organization, you are just one thread in the number of threads they are processing. And if they just see you as a dormant thread, that's who you will be. So you reaching out and saying, hey, can I also do this? Or go with a clear articulation of a vision or whatever you want to do and say, um, Mike, we are doing this. I think we can also do this because these two things actually come closer together. So you kind of extend your span of control or influence, but at the same time, you're adding value to the organization. And many times, what you present, your leader may not have fully thought through, or they might be thinking, who else can do this? And when you go and say, right, that you want to do, they say, okay, Nag's a risk taker, he's thought through more, and he really wants to do something differently. They usually will say, let's invest in it, right?
Right.
So I would say those are some key things. The other part which is good is you always have to observe the dynamics of the organization. Okay, it is, and that is where I would say observe more, talk less, right?
Right.
And I think my introvert personality has helped there quite a lot because I'm not the first one to talk.
Mm.
So I actually observe what people are talking about. Is it actually adding or subtracting? Are they talking for themselves, or are they talking for the team, or are they talking because they want to show themselves as they are in front of something or in control of something, or they know what they're doing? So I start observing these things and I'll say, okay, I see some cracks here, right? It's like those strategic chess moves, right?
Mm.
And you start planning the next 3 or 4 moves, thinking that if this trend of talking and interactions continue, you're going to win, right?
Right.
So that's something I do carefully. And then the last part I do, which has helped me in this journey of how I become who I have, is the risk taking, like I told you, right? And the sacrifices.
Mm.
Everybody has a lot of things going on in life, right? It's not just the work. You have kids that are growing up, you have to take care of parents, you have to take care of your wife, relatives, still be in front of your friends, still do the housework, right? Groceries, cleaning, all that stuff you still have to do.
True.
Um, so how do you kind of navigate knowing that all of these variables and constraints exist,
Mm.
and who is willing to sacrifice for you versus where you are able to do more than what you would normally do during the day? So there have been a lot of long nights. There's been a lot of work that I do after everybody sleeps, right? But I do that because I feel there is a gap that I can close. So those are some of the, I would say, inputs.
Fascinating. One of the things I really connected to what you said was, you need to ask what you want. Um, sharing my own learning, because I think one of the audience I want to target through this podcast is, people who are either starting their careers or
Mhm,
even starting their
mhm,
managerial
mhm.
careers. And I think in my early days, I assumed in my naivety that, you just put your head down, do the
Correct.
hard work, and then
Correct.
the people will notice what you do, and then they kind of show you the path to progression. And of course, I realized that, like you said, you're just one of the threads in multitude
Yeah.
of threads that your manager or leaders have to manage every day. And and not that in a negative way. That's
Mhm,
a job,
mhm,
because no
mhm.
one's really looking out to you
Yeah.
as Ranjit or Nag and watching what's okay. What should I do next for him or her? So I
Correct.
think just standing up and showing what you do, and then
Correct.
asking what you want, kind of like you said, increases your chances of then trusting
Mhm.
you, behaving you, believing in you, and then giving you that
Yeah.
opportunity. So that
Yep.
makes total
Yep.
good sense.
Ex- Yep.
Um, I want to uh, talk a bit about how you organize yourself in your as CIO, CTO, right? In one of in your previous position in one main. So as a CTO, you had multiple kind of areas under you, right? So you had delivery, infrastructures, security, data, and so on. Can you talk a bit about how do you structure the teams? How do you organize yourself? Because obviously these are really deep verticals, but at the same time, you can't go into all of them every day. But same, you need to get a feeling of what's happening so you avoid issues and so on.
Mhm,
Typical
mhm.
leadership. So how do you manage or structure your teams?
Yeah. So few things, right? One thing, one of my leaders at Allstate would always say is structure follows strategy.
Mhm.
Okay. That has really helped me think differently in terms of structure, right? Because the company strategy should be clear for you. And when I say company strategy, the corporate strategy should be clear for you. The business objective should be clear for you. And then as you walk in as a CIO, CTO, you know what the business objectives are. You know which areas of the business need a little more strength versus just running day to day, versus things you might have to deprecate also, right? You might be growing a digital channel, which means the conventional channels may not get the same amount of investment it did previously.
Mhm.
The power of data becomes more critical, the power of security becomes more critical. Infrastructure might move from being in-house to the cloud, right? So those are some of the determinations you make based on those business objectives. Okay. The second part then is once that work you have to do as the CIO, CTO, right? You can take inputs from people, but that is your decision, it's your
Right.
accountability. The second part then is do I have the right people in the right chairs? That does not mean you fire people, but it really means making sure that you have the talent that you need to fulfill those objectives. Okay. And that takes some time because you have to understand the dynamics of an organization. And specifically, as you walk in new, you don't know what the dynamics is, what
Right.
clicks, who are the power makers, who are the power downers, all these things, right? So there is some observation. And again, I think my personality helps in that space because I observe quite a lot, right? And there are terms that have been used at me because of that, like I keep smiling, but then action happens, right? So I would say that's the second thing. And then the third thing really is creating vehicles. So one thing I learned from one of my leaders is scorecarding,
Sorry,
and
can you
that
repeat that?
has scorecarding,
Scorecarding.
creating
Yeah.
scorecards,
Right.
right? Creating scorecards. That has really, really helped me in terms of each area putting together a scorecard that then we share across the organization because there are dependencies, and we highlight where we are falling behind versus where there is a clear dependency versus where we might be able to use third parties, all these things, right? So the scorecard becomes a critical vehicle for me. And then I use those scorecards in monthly reviews. The last part I would say is the way you cascade goals, right? Don't create goals that are not interconnected. Create goals where people can hold each other accountable. And then you, as the leader, have the connection points to all of those cascaded goals, right? So that way, you know that this has to be fulfilled. And it's very transparent the way I do it. It's red, yellow, green. Every month we say we are red here, yellow here, green here. This is why, right?
Mm.
And then we do a year to date and monthly. So we know if things are gaining traction, losing traction, or on track. Those are some of the things. And then the last part I would say is don't tell people what to do. Coach people in terms of how they are doing what they're doing. Because what I've learned is when you tell people what to do, they'll do what you tell them. There might be a lot other ways of doing things, much better ways of doing things. You should not constrain them, right?
Right.
But always hold them to the business objectives and hold them to what we want to achieve as a technology organization. So those are some of the changes I like, the ways I think through it organizationally. So that's the high level structure. Then even getting to the bottom teams, I look at costs very clearly, and that could be how I grew up too, right? So I see what the resource mixes are. I see what are core competencies versus competencies that could be bought, right? So I always do a mix of what we have to build versus what you buy, and then what is long term versus medium short term, and make sure we build teams that way. Because many times you just need accelerators, right,
Right.
to get
Right.
stuff going. The last part is telling the story, right? One of the things that is very critical that I have learned in my journey, and being an introvert, it's hard, but I've always had somebody in my team who's a communication expert, someone who can tell the story, right?
Mm.
I can talk through design, I can draw stuff up, but you need somebody to tell it in a way where the rest of the executive team understands.
Right.
And many times technology is not brought to the forefront when things are working. It is brought to the forefront when things are breaking, right? So having somebody tell the story makes a huge, huge difference.
Mm.
And so creating blogs, making sure newsletters are in play, sharing with the executive team, having spotlights, doing hackathons, just kind of showcasing this is what happens in technology. It motivates the team, and it also shows that we are at the table
Right.
versus on a side table, right? So I would say those are some of the key things that I have learned in my journey. I can't say I know all the nuances, but this is what I've learned to date. And the funny part is it's worked in the various locations and countries I worked in. So it's a good thing.
Yeah, I think you mentioned about having a communication expert, right? I think that goes back to what you mentioned about knowing where the gaps are and how to plug those gaps, right, to kind of help deliver better.
Mhm.
One of the things you mentioned was having the right people in the right positions,
Mhm.
picking the right
Mhm.
talents. I think that's a crucial part of any team
Mhm.
organization.
Yep.
Else, any strategy vision it's going to come up to null
Mhm.
if you don't have right people. When you look at hiring people, our obvious human bias is to lean
Mhm.
towards people who are very similar to us,
Mhm. Mhm.
um, which is a widely known factor. What are some of the techniques you do or questions you ask to make
Yeah.
sure
So
you
so for me, it's actually quite simple. I don't. So first thing is I look for. I always say your pair to win. Everything for me is an acronym, right? Because of how I can remember stuff. So pair for me is passion, attitude, influence, and relationship. Do they have the passion? Do they have the right attitude? Can they influence their peers and their team members? And how do they build relationships with people across the organization? Those are some of the key, I would say, ingredients I look for with existing people as well as people I'm bringing in from outside. Um, that I would say that's the main thing for me, because I believe that the domain knowledge, whatever, can be learned, and they're always resident experts who know the stuff. So if you can influence the people the right way, you're going to get super outcomes. That's one part of the puzzle. The second part of the puzzle is I don't like people who stand out in a, I would say, in a bad way, right? Some people say no peacocks and no jerks, right, in teams. For me, I don't like people who try to say that they're better than anyone else in the team, because we are all there for the common purpose of the company. I have gaps that you may not have, so we complement each other and get the right outcomes. That is what has also helped me when I select people. And the third part for me there is I don't think one location is better than another location. Just because I'm headquartered in a particular location, if there is somebody, and say we have global sites, right? If somebody is good in another global site, they are part of the team, they are part of the executive team, which was a hard one for me actually, because my head used to think that way. And there are a lot of nuances I had to deal with, right? Typical stuff people say, time zone differences, and they can't come in person for the meetings, all that stuff. But I'll tell you, it actually works if those four ingredients are in play. Because if you build the right relationships with that person, you can influence that person well. You have the right attitude and passion, it works. So that's a lesson I've learned after making a few mistakes, right? Nothing comes out clean first time. Um, and again, because of the relationship and influence I had with people, I could make those mistakes. And people said, yeah, you're learning. And being under construction, it's okay, right? One
Right.
or two times you fall in the ditch. So, yep.
Um, Want to shift to your kind of cultural journey, if I can call it that, right? Um, Before moving back to a couple of questions on leadership, and then we'll end the podcast. So you took the leap to move to Denmark after having worked in the US. Um, Big difference, Europe, United States, although both are considered the West, huge difference in terms of working cultures, beliefs, and so on. So if you could talk us through, what made you say yes to the opportunity. What were your assumptions before moving to Denmark? What was reality? Um, and how did it change or affect the way you lead?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. No, it was a fantastic, I would say, if you call it a relearning for me, right? So, being in the US for a while, working in the insurance space for a long time at Allstate, I had become part of, if I call it, this is how you do it, right? For myself, a repeat kind of ways of doing things. And I felt I reached a point in that company where, to your earlier question, I felt I couldn't grow more. And when I say grow more, not in terms of title, but also in terms of enhancing my knowledge and skills, because I always want to stretch my learning muscles because I'm not good at anything else, right? So this opportunity came by, and it's really interesting how it came by because I still can't connect the dots. I got this connection in LinkedIn saying, hey, there's this opportunity. Are you interested? And it was so funny. It was our wedding anniversary, and we had taken the Baltic cruise. We had booked the Baltic cruise that started and ended in Copenhagen.
Okay.
So the timing was just perfect. And at that time, I did not do enough reading to say July and August are light months in that part of the world, right? So I said, yeah. And my wife and kids, so the four of us were going on the cruise. And my wife and kids, we talked and we said, okay, they can go and see Copenhagen, and I'll go for this interview. So the ship docked in Copenhagen, and the trip was done. So we docked in Copenhagen. And from the ship, I got into a taxi. The first question I got asked by the taxi driver was, oh, so you're a mechanic on the ship, right? Because I looked different. Um, and I had no clue of the country, right? I've never been in this part of the world. So we started talking, and then he took me to this place where we had the interview. And it was funny for me because I'm not very tall. I look different, talk different. Everybody were double my size, and in terms of height, a lot more athletic. And I go to this interview, a little teeny weeny guy, and but I had nothing to lose, right? So I was blind over there at the interview. They were talking about what I did, and I was showcasing. We had done some apps on DriveWise, MileWise, telematic stuff. So I started talking through all that, drawing on the board, and looks like I made a mark for the people who interviewed me. Then they said, "Can you come back because it's a holiday time? We will call you back." I said, "Yeah." I didn't really care. And then the funny part was I was called almost immediately to come and join. Jim Ditmore, who was my leader there, he had worked with me at Allstate. So there was a connection point for me, but I had not met Jim. He was not my manager. He used to be in a different area at Allstate. He was this more on the infrastructure side. I was on the app side. So there was a connection point for me. And I did not meet him on the first day of the interview, but then later on met with him, and he took me around the IBU campus there, and he said, "This is where the work is." He showed me Holman's Canal. He showed me all that stuff, and he said, "Nag, this would be a great place for you," kind of, because he believed in me. Let me say it like that. So I had some in there. Then they said a couple of the business leaders had to meet me. I told my wife, "Looks like this is becoming serious now. What do you think?" So she said, "It's up to you," right? She's smart. Then I said, "Okay." I told these guys I can only come on a Friday afternoon because I couldn't tell Allstate anything. And I came Friday afternoon, had the second round of interviews. I think Jim also had told them I'm good. And the first interview, right, those people also liked me. So Monday morning before I woke up, actually, I had the draft offer saying that we would like you to join. So again, did not know anyone. And I had to tell Allstate I was leaving. And I would say a few of us cried because I had some really good connections at Allstate. Um, I said, let me try, and got here first time by myself after the wedding, right? Found an apartment, and I would say there was somebody who helped me find the apartment. So somebody took me around and showed me different places, and then we ended up in this apartment in Strand Boulevard, right? Marstalsgal, that's where I ended up. And was in the apartment, very good landlady. She did whatever she could to help me. And then how do you go to the workplace and all that I had to figure out.
Right.
The good part is in Copenhagen, people in general know English, right? So that was not hard for me. And me being a lazy person, it actually worked out because I could take the bus and train. Got to the place. I would say I was honestly, that phase of life, I spent about 3.5 years in Copenhagen with Lithuania and others, but it was an awesome, awesome experience because I could be my authentic self. I really felt I could be who I was. I did not have to use fancy English words. I did not have to put on a face. I could work very clean with whoever I wanted to work because at least where I worked at Danske Bank, I did not sense a separation between who you are in terms of level versus who you are in terms of being a person who contributes to the value of the bank. And that was a real cool match for me in terms of me as a person and me as a leader. The other interesting thing I learned there, which I still tell people here, is you are who you are when you sit on the chair. You are not who you are because of you being Nag. It's the chair that's the CIO position. It's not Nag who's the CIO, right? That was a beautiful learning for me. People there, I know I've heard other things in terms of people in Denmark being by nature very reserved in terms of who they interact with, the few families they kind of get close with. I actually was lucky, I would say. I would call myself a glorified beggar, but a lot of people out of the blue, including you, Ranjit, right? I had no idea of any of you guys, but you somehow took that extra step to take care of me. To the extent that some of the Danish families made Indian food in their house and they called me home, right? So it was just fantastic for me the way I was treated overall by people. The second part I would say is I actually started learning Danish, so that kind of helped me a little bit. And then I started doing a lot of walking, enjoying the nature, enjoying the places in Denmark, and then showing off on Facebook to the people in the USC. Look at these beautiful places, right? That was another thing. And I would say the last thing when I was in Denmark that really helped me in terms of shaping me further as a leader is there was this nuance in the US where executive presence was a key kind of concept that I was always provided feedback on. Nag, you're really good with people, you're really good with how you do stuff, but you don't have this executive presence. And that used to bug me a lot because I was looking at people being an introvert, right? Like, what are they doing that I'm not doing that they call executive presence? Yes, I don't wear a suit. Yes, I don't look handsome. Yes, I don't do those things. But then what is so great? I couldn't fathom that. And when I talk to mentors also, they would say, it's how you show up, Nag. There's a gap in how you show up. One of the mentors told me, you have a great gift, but you don't know how to tie the bow, right? So that's how it was explained to me. And I was like, why should every gift have a bow? So I was questioning things because I did not know what I was missing clearly. But going through the Denmark journey, I felt you don't need that, right? Because no one dressed up fancy there in a sense. And you saw me, I never wore a suit one day, right? And it all worked well. So I was like, so that was a learning for me that shaped me, saying that it's not how people see you look and how you talk, it's the value you add that makes a difference. And you need to connect with people. That's what makes a difference. Um, just to kind of connect that to Lithuania, right? Lithuania was also a new place for me,
Mhm.
absolutely new place for me. And I have some super close friends to date from Lithuania, right? They still ping me on WhatsApp. They still ping me from time to time, ask how I'm doing, ask for advice. We talk to each other. The culture is very different there. And I actually, by being the CIO there, digital banking, personal banking, right, mobile pay and all that, just like I told you about the bridge that I could create at Allstate when I first went to the US, I felt I could create a good bridge between the Danes and the Lithuanians because of who I was as a person.
Mm.
And it was not intentional, but I became that kind of, if you call, catalyst who silently makes sure people are bonding well. So what we did, which was great, was we did offsites where we rotated locations just to show that no one is bigger than someone else, right? So we did offsites in Copenhagen, Aarhus, or in Lithuania, in some place in Lithuania, or even in India, because we had a captive setup in Bangalore. So that actually neutralized a lot of the leadership and how we kind of work together as a team. We had Lithuanians leading Danish people, Danish leading Lithuanian people, Indians kind of being in front, but India was a separate legal entity, so I couldn't have a direct leadership thing, but they were part of the leadership team. So it kind of made everybody equal. So that was another experience there, which was interesting. Lithuanian culture is very different though. It still has some of this hierarchical culture,
Mm.
but having them being exposed to Denmark kind of helped them smoothen their thoughts of how hierarchical they actually had to be.
Mm.
So even though Nag was king because he was CIO when he went to Vilnius, they still realized that Nag was part of Danske Bank, which was a Danish bank, right? So that was a good thing. Nuances of Sweden, Norway, Finland were other things I also learned because being in the US, you kind of thought everything was similar in terms of culture. Very, 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 very different. Even now, I tell my friends in the US, the most extrovert Finn looks at the other person's shoes, right? So, but they fit me because I was an introvert too. So it was a good journey. No, awesomely good journey. A lot of good learning there.
So you found your people in in
Yeah,
Nordics of all
yeah.
places.
I actually people tease me in the US. They said maybe your previous thing you were actually a Viking, right? And I'm like, no, I'm not that tall or anything, right? But no, they took super care of me. Really good.
So having worked here for 3 years and then having to change, modify, adapt your way of leadership, how was it going back to the US? Was it tough changing back
Yes.
again?
For me, it was more than changing back. So Chicago is in the Midwest,
Mm.
right? I think that's why when I went to Denmark, the adjustment was not that hard for me because there was a Scandinavian influence in some of the Midwest in the US. Okay. So that I think I could just be, like I said, more authentic of who I was in Chicago in the Nordics. The funny part was from there, I came to New York. New York, I still call a different country. It's a very, very different kind of setup. It was hard for me, honestly hard. Um, that company, One Main Financial, had a setup in Evansville, Indiana, which was in the Midwest. So that I could adjust to, no problems, great connection points, a lot of friends. But the executive team is in New York, right?
Mm.
And it took a while for me to get my identity back to be kind of accepted, if I call it that way, in the New York executive team. because there's a different attitude in New Yorkers. Nothing right or wrong, it's just different, right? There's a thing saying, I did this. I am the one who made it happen. I am the one who created this change. In Denmark, if you said that, they'll say, you are not great. Everybody's the same, right? The Yandel, whatever we
Yeah.
used to say,
Yeah.
right? So that was a big shift for me. And that's why I was talking about the storytelling piece, because I didn't have to do that so explicitly in Denmark.
Mm.
But when I came back to the New York, I had to show that value was being added by me. And it was not only when the technology broke down, right?
Right.
So that was the big learning for me there, in terms of telling the story, being in front. If you are quiet, you're ignored in that setup. So you had to show yourself.
Show your
That was
executive
a big shift.
presence again.
Yeah, back to exactly the executive presence. And I think I learned a little more about what that meant when I was in New York,
Mm.
even compared to Chicago, right?
Right.
And then obviously now I've come back. The company now is headquartered in Boston, Duck Creek Technologies. And that's also a really interesting thing, because I was in New York doing quite well, adjusting, learning how to work with my peers while we were executing a lot of stuff like you asked before the question. And in the 2020 December, one of the guys I had actually worked with at Allstate, he had been serving as a mentor since he and I got disconnected in a sense, right? He reached out and he said, hey, Nag, we have this great role for you as head of engineering. Are you interested? And at that time, I said, let me think about it. He said, no, you have been too long away from your family. You need to come back. We have an office in Rosemont, which is like close to home. And he said, that's where you will. The headquarters is in Boston, but you will be based in the Rosemont area. It's going to work out for you well. And I promise you, this will be a great journey for you. The work will be hard, but I think somebody like you can make a huge difference because of your ability to see things across the company. And Duck Creek is a very different kind of company. It's a startup uh, plus Accenture, right? So
Okay.
that's how that company was created. And it went public a couple of years ago. So they are on a journey where they're learning to be an adult, if I call it, a very, very different construct, right? So you have a mix of startup culture with Accenture formal culture, and then people like me who have been infused. And we are trying to kind of build that company together. So it's a new learning for me there in terms of how do you work, scale. Don't take things for granted. Budget is not that easily available. In my previous company, I would say I would get, right? Here, you have to weigh priorities and see whether what you're asking for is more important than someone else's budget.
Right.
So those are new muscles that I'm building. Um, People wise, still similar, right?
Mm.
A little different because you're trying to kind of bring the startup versus formal culture together and integrate, as well as people like me who are new trying to fit into those two cultures. So the people wise, there's that difference. Technology wise, it's all cloud centric. And that's in a sense easier than having too many disconnected technology stacks. So that's working well. But the key thing is building a company, right? So that is new for me. Just when public, how do you make sure you still are relevant in the public's eyes? At the same time, you start building the foundation to scale and extend. So that's kind of been the journey that I've been through in the last 9 months now.
Duck Creek, is it a startup or is it like in the scaling up phase or
It's in the
where?
scaling up. It's in the
Right.
scaling up. So our goal is to be the SaaS leader in insurance, property casualty product business, right? So it's a really good, I would say, spot, because many of the insurers now are also looking at digital transformation. And insurance is an industry that's always kind of lagged behind because of regulations,
Absolutely.
right? There's a lot of regulation and you're just constrained. So with you building out of the box kind of capabilities across the insurance value chain, you offer insurers the chance to kind of build on top versus building everything from scratch.
Right.
And since you're already cloud native as a SaaS provider, what you build is extensible, right? For them to customize upon and kind of get what they need. So that's the value proposition there. And they can buy one or the whole suite. So they can buy the entire insurance suite, or they can say, I just want claims, or I just want policy or billing, right? So it kind of gives you that opportunity also, depending on where you are in your transformation journey, or where you think you have to do things because there's competition. And insurtechs, just like the fintechs, right? They are becoming big now.
Absolutely.
And a lot of these insurtechs become value-added services on your core suite.
Mm.
So how do you position for that? So that's the business we are in. It's a lot of third-party integration, um, providing right those hooks for companies to kind
Yep.
of connect to these third parties.
Right. I don't know much about insurance, but from what I've read, I think it's the next industry.
Yeah,
Really, you're already being
it's ripe. It's ripe.
transformed to
Yeah,
the digital
yeah,
age
it's
due
ripe
to the
for
reason.
transformation. Yeah,
Absolutely.
it's
Yeah.
ripe. Yeah, it is.
Okay. Moving on to the final segment now. I think it's been fascinating, and I didn't realize time flying by. Uh, you started the podcast with mentioning you're an introvert, right? And I kind of relate to a lot of what you said because I'm an introvert myself. I think it probably justifies maybe defining what introvert is. I think it's a many thing to many people, but I think personally feel maybe a few years ago it was looked upon as a negative trait. But I think
Mm-hmm.
with it's becoming more wider and people are appreciating the value introverts bring, and it's not looked up as a negative thing, but just another trait people
Yeah.
have. And I love this definition that Simon Sinek, I don't know how you say it,
Yeah. Yeah. Simon
but
Sinek. Yeah.
Sinek, right? See, his definition is it's where you draw your energy from,
Yeah.
right? So introverts gain energy from spending time themselves alone. Extroverts gain energy by surrounding themselves with people. And it's a fascinating example he gave us. It's like, if your energy is equal to 10 coins, right? Introverts, when they wake up in the morning, they are fully recharged, and they have those 10 coins. And every interaction they have with people during the day, they just lose those 10 coins. At
It
the end of the day,
drains.
they have no
Yeah.
coins left. They need to recharge. Extroverts, they wake up with 0 coins. The more interactions they have, the more coins they gain. So I think it's a good definition to have. So a couple of questions around you being an introvert and how you've managed grown your career, right? Um, you're also humble, as you said. So my question is, being humble and being nice to people, um, there could be a risk, not that always happens, that people take you lightly, and take you for granted, sometimes not respecting you as a leader. How do you balance that out? Um,
It is actually a true statement, right? I've got that feedback quite a bit. The most, I would say, relevant feedback I got was actually in Denmark, of all places, right? And Jesper Nielsen, who used to be my business partner, he actually made this observation that even I did not actually see myself, right? He said, Nag, why do you allow people to disrespect you? I was like, wow, right? This is something I personally had never thought through. But when he told me this, that's one of the things about introverts, right? When somebody tells you something, you start doing a lot of introspection, saying, why would somebody say this?
mm,
When you're an extrovert, you say, that's another statement, right? So it really helped me think through my construct. And you're right, because being humble and nice, people sometimes think that you're a pushover,
right.
right? We can, Nag will say this, or Nag will say this. So what I have done to compensate for that, I'm not going to change who I am. Like I said, the why in happy is being yourself. But I got the A, which is action oriented. I am action oriented. So it's a good combination of being humble and action oriented. What does that mean for me, right? I might still conduct myself in a way that is nice. I might still conduct myself in a way that is humble. I'm still personable, but I have to hold people accountable for actions. I cannot do that in a typical hyper assertive way. And that is why I've done these vehicles like scorecards, right? Picking people who have passion, attitude, influence, and relationship. So I started using those ingredients to kind of make my food tasty, if I call it. because that is how I have been able to kind of accomplish what I want. Being action oriented, you can ask anyone about Nag, they'll say execution is Nag. He'll make it happen. But the way he makes it happen is very different, right? I've also got, yeah, I have to say this, I know it'll come across weird, but people have called me smiling assassin,
Okay.
right? So in my own way, people see the smile on me, but because I'm action oriented, you'll actually see changes happen.
Mm.
I will still be nice to you. I will still say, Ranjit, you're a super guy, great human being, all that. However, if actions are not happening, I will help Ranjit find another job. I will not fire him. I will help him find another job, or I will talk to him in a way where he understands that he's not the right person for this job. Again, not in a negative way.
Right.
So I've taken advantage of my being humble and being nice in that way. Of late, I've got some feedback, which is really interesting. And this is something I'm learning, the difference of being nice versus being kind, right? This is where you are, you're still I'm a person of heart, right? You are still a person of heart. You think deeply, but you use your heart to make decisions. However, be kind in meaning that if Ranjit is not doing a good job, rather than sugarcoating it and saying, you can also do this, maybe you should look at it like this, you be clear about it. Ranjit, this is what I expect from you, and I am seeing that you're falling short, right? That way, Ranjit actually knows that he has that shortcoming and he needs to do something differently. Because otherwise, by being nice all the time, you can sometimes confuse that other person,
Right.
right? So that is something I'm working on now in terms of learning, translating from being nice to kind while being humble. So being kind and action oriented will actually go a longer way for me, I feel, versus being nice, because then you start killing yourself a lot at home.
Mm.
Did I say something that was hurtful? Did I say, like, that person may not even care, but you start thinking more than you need to, and you actually destroy your own harmony, right?
Right.
So that is one thing I would say. The second part that has helped me is sounding boards. That has helped me a lot.
Mhm.
So knowing that I'm humble, knowing that I'm nice, I have used this concept of sounding boards where I pick two people who are exact opposites,
Okay.
and I ask for feedback and advice. So not necessarily mentors, but in a meeting, right? I say, I know this is a delicate topic I'm going to talk about, okay, which can get people worried, excited, angry, whatever, right? It's delicate. So because I am an introvert and I observe people carefully, I know the ones who are at extremes. So I use those two as my sounding boards. And then post that meeting, I'll ask for feedback and say, how did I come across?
Right.
And my belief is, because I've got the extremes, I've covered the whole audience, right? That has helped me. And then the third thing I do is practice, right? Which is a hard thing again, but I talk to my mentors and I'll say, hey, this is something that I'm going to be dealing with. You guys know, and that's why I pick more than one mentor, right?
Yeah.
I'll say, this is what I'm going to be dealing with. You guys know me well in terms of how I come across, how I interact with people. What are some of the specific words I should and should not be using so it doesn't come across too soft or too hard.
Right.
And that has also helped me. But yes, overall, to your point, though, it is right. It is hard being humble and nice because people can take you for granted. So you have to use other muscles, right? In a way where, like I
Yeah.
said, smiling assassin is used at me. It has helped me. It has definitely helped me.
Great. Um, I want to wrap up with, I think it wouldn't do justice to this interview if we don't talk about your kind of more, say, I want to say philanthropic, but not really. So the way of giving back to society. There are so many different avenues and ways in which you give back. If you can just mention your view on that, and
Yeah.
also mention
So
why is it important. So yeah.
yeah, more for me, more than philanthropic, the key thing for me is, like I said in the beginning, there are a lot of people who need stuff. Okay. And it could be right from creating avenues for them to become a better version of themselves
Mm.
versus having somebody to talk to versus having something tangible that they actually need to become more deserving of who they could become, right? So those are some of the things that I have looked at. Growing up in India and coming from India, I have, like you said when you introduced me, I am very close to helping underprivileged kids, and not helping underprivileged kids by giving them money,
Yeah.
but helping them learn and learn well.
Mm.
So that is how I got associated with Pratham. And I've been working with Pratham for the last 10 plus years
Mm.
as a volunteer. And what I have done is I've taken my kids to a village in India, helped them see the reality,
Mm.
doing readathons, right? Participating in these kinds of conversations. Um, so all of that has really helped me kind of believe that it's a very good cause, because I see some of these kids, I can't say all, but some of these kids emerge learned, right? They come across good. Vocational training is another thing, right? So those are a couple of things that I've done in India. Then within the US, again, utilizing my, if I call it strengths, as the advisory member of the Indo-American Community Services, the whole idea for me was I came from India and there's a lot of opportunity in the US, right? So how do I connect that together? So helping entrepreneurs where they can pitch solutions, resume critiquing,
Mm.
helping people to prepare for jobs, mentoring. Those are some of the key things I do through IACS.
Right.
Leadership talks, right? Digital talks, things like that. And then the last part I kind of contribute really is in formal mentoring for professionals. So, like you said, right, people sometimes feel stuck, or they just don't know what to do next.
Yeah.
They don't know what questions to ask. They don't know where to go to next.
Mm.
How do they deal with constraints at home versus professional life? So those are typically the types of questions I get. And it's interesting, Ranjit, like irrespective of countries, irrespective of industries, irrespective of where you are in your career, it's just different flavors of those questions,
True.
right? And many times I learn a lot by asking or engaging in these conversations and say, yeah, that's another aspect. This is another aspect, right? So it just kind of helps me build my strength in how to help others, right? So that's the third. Those are three key things I get personally involved um, in terms of giving back. Um, it's like I said, it's not a lot of money really, but more in terms of talking and helping people get to where they could be. But the bad thing with me is I do follow up. So if people say they're doing these things, I actually check back, because I want to make sure that what I did really helps
Yeah.
somebody, or and if it hurts somebody, I want to know that so I know how I can do it better next time,
Mm.
right? So the feedback loop is important for me.
The smiling assassin comes back there, following up.
I that
With
I don't know how that got created, but it's a true thing. That's what people have told me.
I find this very, very inspiring because I have the same uh, you know thoughts as well of giving back in some way. And I like you. I don't. For me, it's not about philanthropy or giving,
Yeah,
financing something, but it's about giving your time and energy,
correct,
and
correct.
also setting up some structures, systems in place which is
Yep,
sustainable and will
correct.
kind of stand itself without financial support.
Exactly.
So I would definitely love to connect with you to seek ways in which I
Yep.
can help. Last couple of more easy questions, not easy, but light questions. How do you unwind? What are your hobbies? What do you do to kind of switch off?
So I don't switch off. That's one problem I have, honest.
Mhm.
But what do I do? I like listening to Indian classical music a lot. That is a good way for me to actually reflect on things that I can do differently. I use music to help me there.
Mhm.
And I do come from a music family. Like I told you, my mom used to teach the Veena. My daughter sings, my mother in law sings. So there's a lot of singing in my house, if you
Right.
call it.
Mhm.
So that is one. The second part is I love traveling. And I'm lucky, like I told you, my wife also likes that. So we do go out quite a lot to the different countries. I like nature. I always feel nature gives me strength. and then looking at people, how they interact, learning, right?
Mm.
Just the body language versus some people scream when they're happy, some people are soft when they're happy, some people are soft when they're angry, some are loud when they're angry. All these things are real nuances I like. And the last part, which is new for me because of the pandemic, is watching quiz shows.
Okay.
And I've got hooked into it now, the BBC quiz and
Wow.
Mastermind. And yeah, those are the key things. News is not worth seeing nowadays, right? It's mostly negative. So those are the key things that keep me outside of work. Reading wise, I have to tell you this. It's a good one, Ranjit. Yesterday, I had a chance to read this Employees First, Customers Second by Vineet Nair from HCL. This is an old one from 2011. There's also YouTube video, but I was like, wow, with 70,000 employees, they affected that transformation over multiple years.
Mm.
It's just fascinating in terms of how Vineet went through that journey, right? Those kinds of things I like, podcasts as well as books where something meaningful has happened to change or shift something that was in place.
Right.
Those are the types of books I really like, or YouTube videos or any podcast that I can see, right? Those are some of the things. Turning the Ship Around, many people have read that. I like
Mm.
that one too. But yeah, those are the things. Maybe it's that time in my life now. I'm like, hey, how can I make a difference, right? So yeah, that's what I do.
So, and you already answered my final question, which was any recommendation of books or podcasts. So thanks. But now this has been absolutely fascinating, riveting interview for me. Just listening to you and learning about who you are and your journey and where you reached. Uh, Huge inspiration. A lot of things I could connect it to because of our shared backgrounds or
Yep.
also maybe our personalities. Thank you for your time. Really,
Thank you.
really appreciate it, and hope it inspires anyone else who's watched this in some small way.
Yep.
Thank you,
Thank
Nag.
you, man. Thank you.
Big
Take
pleasure.
care. Bye.